الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Welcome, brothers and sisters. We're back at it. Chapter 5 today. We're going to be talking about faith in the day of resurrection. This is a long one. It's going to be multi-part. So today we're going to go into the first one. Let's jump right into it. What is faith in the day of resurrection? Faith in the day of resurrection is the firm belief that Allah mentions in the Quran and in all that the Prophet has told us about the afterlife, the fitna of the grave, punishments and rewards therein, the resurrection, the gathering, the records, the reckoning, the scale, the fount, the bridge, which is as-sirat in Arabic, the intercession, paradise and the hellfire, and everything which Allah has prepared for those who dwell in it. So what is faith in the day of resurrections? It's all listed here. The firm belief in all that Allah mentions in the Quran and all that the Prophet ﷺ has told us about in the afterlife, the fitna of the grave, the punishments and rewards, the resurrection, the gathering, the records, the reckoning, the scale, the fountain, the bridge, which is as-sirat in Arabic, the intercession, paradise, and everything that is prepared in them. And so we're going to be going into all these in detail in this section of the series. Okay, so the Quran's focus on this issue and the wisdom behind it. Okay. The Holy Quran mentions the last day on numerous occasions and in many different literary styles. It reaffirms its events, reminds us of its afflictions, and asserts its occurrence, linking the belief in the last day to Allah. Chapter 2, verse 177, verse 62 and 232. These are three different ayahs that speak about how the Quran links the last day to belief in Allah. So translated, this says, righteousness is not that you turn your faces towards the east or the west, but true righteousness is one who believes in Allah, the last day, the angels, the book, and the prophets, and gives wealth in spite of love for it. And the verse goes on. So here it says, righteousness is not that you turn your face towards the east or west, but part of one of the many aspects of righteousness is belief in the last day. Okay, so that's Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2, verse 177. Now, verse number 62 also speaks of this. And translated, that says, indeed, those who believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabians, which is before the Prophet Muhammad, those among them who believed in Allah and the last day and did righteousness will have the reward with their Lord, and no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve. Okay, so that's Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2, verse 62. Again, Allah linking belief in the last day to belief in Allah. And then finally, verse 232. Okay, so translated, that says, and when you divorce women and they have fulfilled their term, do not prevent them from remarrying their former husbands if they agree among themselves on an acceptable basis. That is instructed to whoever of you believes in Allah and the last day. That is better for you and pure, and Allah knows and you know not. So again, That is Allah in the Quran linking belief in the last day to belief in Him. Those are 3 verses from chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah. Okay, so moving on. The Quran mentions the last day on virtually every page. It recounts its events and conditions in verified literary styles. It also provides you with a wealth of details on this subject, something which is rarely found in connection with other issues falling in the domain of al-ghaib, the unseen. So unlike a lot of the unseen, we have limited information. This is spoke about in abundance, this day of resurrection. So moving on, Allah calls the last day by many names, by many other names, each of which describes the afflictions that will occur on that day. So some of these names I've listed. 1, the resurrection. 2, the hour. 3, the last day. 4, Yawm ad-Din. 5, Yawm al-Hisab, the day of accounting. 6, Yawm al-Nushur, the day of rising. And Yawm al-Hashr, and so on. There are many more. So those are some of the names. Again, we'll go through them. The resurrection, the hour, the last day, Yawm ad-Din, Yawm al-Hisab, Yawm al-Nushur, Yawm al-Hashr, and so on. The reasons for this interest in the last day in the Quran. Faith in the last day has a great influence on man's life. Belief in the events of the last day, such as heaven, hell, judgment, punishment, reward, ensures the believer's conformity and adherence to righteous conduct and piety towards Allah. There is a great difference between a person who does not believe that he will be resurrected and judged for every word and deed, and one who does. So there's a difference between one who doesn't believe he'll be resurrected and held accountable, and one who does not. The first is solely driven by his own personal interests and preoccupied only by his worldly ambitions, with no constraint on him, chasing their desires and appetites. His selfish objectives justify any means, attitudes, or deeds, however harmful to himself and others they prove to be. So the one who doesn't believe in an accounting for, he's just pretty much living following his whims and desires and appetites, no matter whether they're harmful to him or others. And then the person who believes that they will be judged by the most impartial judge, who is Allah, and rewarded for any good and punished for every sin, conducts himself within the boundaries of truth, goodness, and rectitude. Those are the characteristics that please Allah on that day. Now, a verse that speaks about this, chapter Al-A'raf, verses 8 and 9. Okay, so translated, these two verses say, and the weighing of deeds that day will be the truth. So those whose scales are heavy, it is they who will be the successful. And those whose scales are light, they are the ones who will lose themselves for what injustice they were doing towards our verses. So these are two verses speaking about accountability on the Day of Judgment. The Quran also emphasizes on belief in the last day in connection to performing righteous deeds. A chapter that speaks about this is chapter Al-Mumtahana, verse 6. Allah says,
لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِيهِمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ.
Translated, this says, there has certainly been for you in them an excellent pattern for anyone whose hopes in Allah and the last day, and whoever turns away, then indeed Allah is free of need, the praiseworthy. So this talks about the connection of the last day and performing righteous deeds. Another one that speaks about this is chapter Al-An'am, verse 92.
وهذا كتاب أنزلناه مبارك مصدق الذي بين يديه ولتنذر أم القرى ومن حولها والذين يؤمنون بالآخرة يؤمنون به وهم على صلاتهم يحافظون.
Okay, translated, this says, and this is a book which we have sent down, blessed and confirming what was before it, that you may warn the mother of cities and those around it. Those who believe in the hereafter believe in it, and they are maintaining their prayers. So these are two verses that speak about the Quran and its link to righteous deeds. By his very nature, man seeks to acquire benefits and to ward off harm. Belief in the Day of Judgment reinforces this instinctive drive that draws us towards good and away from evil. The Quran constantly reminds us of the last day and excels in describing it because of the beneficial influence this has in reinforcing our instinct for self-advancement. So another reason is that man forgets and disregards the last day. Man clings to earth and is too preoccupied with worldly pleasures and possessions. Belief in the Day of Judgment and the joy and suffering therein mitigates the excesses of his love for this life. It makes him realize that the pleasures to be had on this earth do not deserve to be coveted, labored for, and competed over. Only what awaits them on the great day merits such an effort. So it helps you disattach from thinking that everything in this world and material and everything this world has to offer is everything. There's something that's much greater, and the world preoccupies us and distracts us from this, so it constantly reminds us of this in the Quran. Verses 30 in chapter At-Tawbah speaks about this. So translated, the Jews say Israel is the son of Allah, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. That is their statement from their mouths. They imitate the sayings of those who disbelieved before them. May Allah destroy them. How are they deluded? So this verse speaks about how man clings to earth and is too preoccupied with worldly things. How they took certain people that are just men as a God, and belief in the last day. It mitigates the excesses for his life, for his love for this life. Okay, and it makes him realize that the pleasures to be had on this earth do not deserve to be coveted, labored for, or competed over. So moving on, evidence for the belief in the last day and those who deny it. Evidence for belief in the last day and those who deny it. Both the Quran and the Sunnah give plenty of evidence for the belief in the last day. The detail in the Quran sets it apart from all the previous revelations. Allah often mentions the last day in His book, giving proofs of it and repudiating the denials of those who have no faith in resurrection. We can also find ample details about the events and the circumstances of that day in the Quran. Although every prophet before Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ had given his people glad tidings of and forewarned them against it the day of judgment, and branded all who denied or doubted it as disbelievers. The details given in the Quran sets it apart from the previous revelations. Allah says in the Holy Quran, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, there is none who has the right to be worshipped but He. Surely He will gather you together on the day of resurrection, about which there is no doubt. And another verse, Allah says, it is not al-birr, piety, righteousness, and every act of obedience to Allah that you turn your faces towards the east and the west. We spoke about that. But al-birr is the one who believes in Allah and the last day, and the angels, and the book, and the prophets, and gives his wealth, etc. Also Allah says, and whoever disbelieves in Allah, His angels, His books, His messenger, and the day of judgment, then indeed he has strayed far, far away. The Quran relates to us what the Prophet Noah said to his people. And Allah has created you from dust of the earth. Afterwards He will return you into the earth and bring you forth again for the day of resurrection. It also informs us of what Abraham said. And who will cause me to die and then bring me to life again? And who, I hope, will forgive my faults on the day of recompense and resurrection. And Allah told Moses as well, verily the hour is coming, and my will is to keep it hidden, that every person may be rewarded for that which he strives. Therefore, let not the one who believes not therein in the day of resurrection, and the reckoning and paradise and hell, etc., but follows his own lusts, divert you therefrom, lest you perish. Okay? And Allah the Exalted instructed the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on several occasions to swear by His name that the day of judgment will come. Allah says, the disbelievers pretend that they will never be resurrected for the account. Say, O Muhammad, yes, by my Lord, you will certainly be resurrected. Okay? Now moving on. Those who reject the possibility of resurrection, in effect, disbelieve in Allah's messengers whose truthfulness is attested to by logic and tangible proof. Those skeptics have no proof to support their position. Resurrection is a matter of ghaib, which is unknown, known only to Allah. The basic principles in matters of the unseen, the ghaib, is that no one can prove or disprove them without reference to Allah. If decisive proof is established that a person is communicating what Allah has revealed, like the prophets and the messengers were, there's ample proof that they were communicating with Allah, then it is sufficient to establish the validity of his account of those matters. This is a reasonable fact because we know by intuition that nobody can confirm or deny the existence of something in a place or time except if he happens to know it or is informed about it by an observer. If the existence of this thing or its absence does not contradict with reason. For example, if a person denies the existence of the day of resurrection, we consider him a liar, even if no one has informed us about it. How if we were informed by people who are impossible to lie, as in the prophets and the messengers? Allah is the only one who knows the ghaib, the unseen, so we follow only those whom Allah has taught, that is, the prophets and the messengers. Moving on. This proof has only been available to the messengers whom Allah has supported with miracles and revealed to them some of the accounts of the ghaib, which is the unseen. On the issue of resurrection, all those messengers have spoken about the day of judgment. One of the objections which people who deny the possibility of resurrection have raised is their rejection of the idea of the body returning after it has been turned into, the bones have been turned into dust. So some verses that speak about this is At-Taghabun verse 7.
زعم الذين كفروا أن لن يبعثوا قل بلى وربي لتبعثن ثم لتنبؤن بما عملتم وذلك على الله يسير.
Translated, those who disbelieve have claimed that they will never be resurrected. Say, yes, by my Lord you will surely be resurrected, then you will surely be informed of what you did, and that for Allah is easy. So that's one verse that speaks about this issue of resurrection. Another one is Al-Jathiyah verse 22.
نموت ونحيا وما يهلكنا إلا الدهر وما لهم بذلك من علم إن هم إلا يظنون.
And they say, there is not but our worldly life, we die and live, and nothing destroys us except time, and they have of that no knowledge. They are only assuming. That's another verse in the Quran that speaks about this. Also, Al-Jathiyah verse 26. قُلَ اللَّهُ يُحْيِيكُمْ ثُمَّ يُمِيتُكُمْ ثُمَّ يُحْيِيكُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ وَلَكِنْ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Say, Allah causes you to live, then causes you to die. Then He will assemble you for the day of resurrection, about which there is no doubt, but most people do not know. So these are some verses, and one last verse, yes, Surah Yasin, verse 78 through 81. وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثَلًا وَنَسَى خَلْقَهُ قَالَ مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. And he presents for us an example and forgets His own creation. He says, who will give life to the bones while they are disintegrated? قُلْ يُحْيِيهِ الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ. Say, He will give them life who produced them the first time, and He is of all creations knowing. الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمْ مِنَ الشَّجَرِ الْأَخْضَرِ نَارًا فَإِذَا أَنْتُمْ مِنْهُ تُوقِدُونَ. And He who made you from the green tree fire, and then from it you ignite. Okay, the deniers raise objections that have always been the same throughout the ages. They doubt Allah's ability to turn the bones and dust of their bodies into being with senses and feelings. They don't believe in it because they don't know when it will happen. Those doubts clearly stem from ignorance of life and death of Allah's power, ignorance of Allah's power, and an oversight of the ramifications of this absolute power in creating life out of nothingness. It should have been sufficient for the doubters to recall Allah's ability in creating them for the first time when they had been nothing. It should be enough to make them realize that their Creator tells them the truth when He informs them about the appointed hour, about judgment, reward, and punishment. The reply to their doubts, simple and obvious as it is sufficient to silence them. Man has found himself created and brought into life after having not existed before. He must therefore have had been created. His death is another condition he goes through. It is a change that could be brought about by Allah, for anyone else who possesses such power would have certainly used it to prevent his own death. When having understood and believed all of this Creator then tells us that He will bring us into life once more, recreating us. And we already went over the verses that spoke about that. The author of Sharh al-Aqeedah al-Tahawiyya wrote in commentary upon this verse, if the most knowledgeable, eloquent, and expressive person were to endeavor to put forth a better or even equal argument using words that are as clear and concise and accurate as those in the above verses that we went over, he would surely fail. Allah starts this verse with a question asked by an atheist which called for a response. Allah says, and He forgets His own creation. So now we're kind of backtracking to this first verse. Okay, when Allah said, and He forgets His own creation, was sufficient to establish proof and eliminate any doubt. When Allah wants to emphasize and reinforce the argument, He says, say He will give life to them, the one who created them the first time. And so He presents the initial creation as evidence. His ability to recreate, it's as evidence of His ability to recreate a second time. Any sensible person would certainly know that Allah will easily bring back the dead, having brought them into existence in the first place. As the act of creation requires of the Creator power over the created and knowledge of them, Allah adds He is all knower of all creation. As He knows everything about the first creation, its constituents, materials, and forms, He also knows all about the second creation. How could it be difficult for Him who is complete in knowledge and absolute in power, to bring back life from bones and dust. Allah reaffirms the issue with an overwhelming argument and clear evidence, which also incorporates an answer to another of the atheist questions. The non-believer asks, the bones of the dead are dry and cold while living matter is warm and moist. How could the latter spring forth from the former? Allah replied to this by saying, He who produces for you fire from the green trees, when behold you kindle therewith. Allah tells them the burning wood which is hot and dry is produced from live wood which is cold and moist. Allah, who easily produces things from their opposite, can manipulate His creation and His constituent matter. It is He who also effects the changes rejected by the believers. Allah then further re-emphasizes the point by referring to His ability to do something even greater and more complex. Any sensible person knows very well that the ability to perform acts of great magnitude surely indicates the possibility, even ease of carrying out lesser actions. He said, is it not He who created the heavens and the earth, able to create the like of them? The Creator who brought into being the heaven and the earth with all their majesty, unimaginable vastness and magnificence, is surely able to resurrect the dead with ease and return them to their original state. Okay. So Allah said in the Quran, O mankind, if you are in doubt about resurrection, then verily we have created you from dust, Adam, then from a nutfa, then from a clot, then from a little lump of flesh, some formed and some unformed, like the miscarriage, that we may make it clear for you to show you our power, and we cause whom we will to remain in the womb for the appointed term. Then we bring you out as infants, then give you growth that you may reach your age of full strength. And among you there is he who dies young, and among you there is he who is brought back to the miserable old age, so that he knows nothing after having known. And you see the earth barren, but when we send down water on it, it is stirred to life. It swells and puts forth every lovely kind of growth. That is because Allah, He is the truth, and it is He who gives life to the dead, and it is He who is able to do all things. And surely the hour is coming, there is no doubt about it, and certainly Allah will resurrect those who are in the graves. So this is chapter Al-Hajj, verses 5 through 7. When we contemplate these verses of Surah Al-Hajj, we find in them proof of resurrection and clear signs for Allah's power in raising the dead from the grave. They dispel all doubt about this issue from the heart, remove any skepticism, and counter the suspicions of the stubborn. They contain proof of the creation of all human beings that started with lifeless soil. This proof was discussed in some details above. They also highlight one of the aspects of Allah's power in creating mankind, elevating it from one stage to the next, and transforming it from one condition to another, which differs radically from its predecessors. Allah transformed man from a nutfa to a clot to a lump of flesh. Then He installs in him sight and hearing, senses, nerves and bones and muscles, and so on. Man was thus born with a perfected body, which is the best form and most excellent state of any creature. We're told in the Quran, verily we created man of the best stature. This is in Surah Al-Teen, verse 4. After all this, how would Allah be unable to resurrect him and breathe life back into him? For the Almighty, the All-Knowing, it would surely be simply another operation of transforming him from one state to another. The obstinate can always see the parallels of resurrection in himself and in every other person on this earth. Okay, Sayyid Qutb, may Allah grant him mercy, after commenting on the previous verses, pointed out a delicate concept contained within them. He wrote, the stages through which human beings pass as embryos and as children indicate that the will which fashioned them will lead man to his possible perfection in the home of perfection, which is Dar al-Kamal. Man never reaches his perfection on this earth. He stands still, then retreats, so that he knows nothing after having known. There must be another life in which man reaches his destined perfection. Those stages are evidences of resurrection in two ways. They prove that the one who is capable of creating is also capable of recreating, and that the perfection of this creation reaches its ultimate form in the afterlife. Thus the laws of creation and recreation, of life and resurrection, of judgment and recompense all attest to the existence of the Creator who disposes our affairs, of whose existence there is no doubt. There's another point to be made concerning the stages through which we pass during the process of creation. Those who are obstinate, who deny resurrection and the raising of the dead, are directed towards observing that this act of divine creation is present in the case of each one of them, indeed in every human being. Before he was fashioned in due proportion, he was a drop of insignificant liquid, a clot, and a lump of flesh, all of which are inconsequential stages in which man is more dead than alive. Nonetheless, Allah still gives full life to those substances. He forms our bodies and provides them with the means for leading full lives, and He nurtures us until we become full beings who feel and think, argue and dispute. The act of creation which brought us unto this earth in the first place is not unlike bringing the dead back to life. Those who deny the resurrection insist it is impossible. So Allah tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Qiyamah, verses 37 through 40, was he not a nutfa, mixed male and female? Was he not a nutfa, which is mixed male and female, impure liquid, poured forth? Then he became an alaqa, which is a clot. Then Allah shaped and fashioned him in due proportion and made him into two sexes, male and female. Is he not able to give life to the dead? In the above verse we find more proof of resurrection, further confirmation of Allah's ability to give life and death. When Allah sends rain upon barren earth, life begins to stir and new plants emerge with different colors, taste, scents, shapes and uses. Allah also says in the Quran, and among His signs, and this is verse 39, Fussilat, and among His signs that you see the earth barren, but when we send down water, rain to it, it is stirred to life and growth of vegetation. Verily, He who gives it life surely is able to give life to the dead. Indeed, He is able to do all things. The Prophet was asked, how does Allah give life to the dead, and what is the sign of that in His creation? The Prophet replied, haven't you passed by your family's barren river? The man said, yes. The Prophet said, and then you pass by it full of life and green? The man replied, yes. The Prophet said, He, Allah, who gives life to the dead, and that is His sign and His creation. Allah also says in the Quran, in Al-Mu'minun verse 115, did you think that we had created you in play without any purpose, and that you would not be brought back to us? He also says, does man think that he will be left neglected without being punished or rewarded for the obligatory duties enjoined by his Lord on him? Those two verses and other similar ones confirm the belief in the Ma'ad, which is the day of final abode, in judgment and in recompense, is necessary for Tawheed of Allah in all of His attributes and His names. The principle is part and parcel of the first aspect of faith. Those who do not believe in it are not counted as believers in Allah. For such, this belief is a denial of the wisdom of Allah, His justice towards His creation, and denial of His attributes. Okay, so that was an important part, so I wrote it down. These verses confirm that belief in Allah, the Ma'ad, that belief in the Ma'ad, the day of final abode, in judgment and recompense, is necessary for the Tawheed of Allah in all of His names and attributes. This principle is part and parcel of the first aspect of faith. Those who disbelieve in it are not counted as believers in Allah. For such, disbelief is denial of the wisdom of Allah and His justice towards His creation. So that was an important point. Okay, now moving on. This is going to be the final point for today. The disbelief in Tawheed is accompanied by man's disdain for himself. For such a person as harbors this disbelief believes that he was created for no purpose or not for a great reason, that his existence is limited to his fleeting presence on this earth, which is full of affliction, worries, problems, distress, injustice, and sins. He believes that he is left alone with no reward for those who are just or punishment for the transgressors. Belief in the afterlife and the resurrection befits Allah's majesty, justice, and wisdom. It is what a sound intellect dictates and a healthy nature finds natural. Okay? Like I said, we're unloading a lot in this one. Make sure you get everything down on the board, and part 2 is coming next. Stay tuned.